Hello, and welcome back to the Loco Files. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at the Maunsell Z-Class. The Southern Railway Z-Class was a class of 080 three-cylinder tank engine designed by Richard Maunsell and intended for heavy shunting on the Southern Railway. The class first entered service in 1929, with 8 members being built. It was deemed successful and would have been built in greater numbers, but an order for a further 10 was cancelled due to the reduction in freight traffic as a result of the Great Depression. The class would carry on into BR ownership and survive until 1962, when they were withdrawn and scrapped, with the last member being cut up in 1965. Sadly, no members of the class have survived into preservation. The newly amalgamated Southern Railway needed a group of powerful shunting tank locomotives to work its marshalling yards in and around London and on freight transfers between them. Robert Urey's G16 class performed this task well, and further examples were on order in 1922. But Richard Maunsell considered the firebox to be too large and the superheater an unnecessary expense on such locomotives. He therefore cancelled the order in favour of a new design. Due to the requirement for heavy shunting, the design was provided with an 080 wheel arrangement to increase traction, whilst enabling the locomotive to negotiate tight curves which are prevalent in goods yards. Another requirement was for the locomotive to be able to maintain power after long periods of standing idle, as freight marshalling was an intermittent duty. A 1,500 gallon water capacity was also required to reduce the need for regular watering. The Z-Class was the only Maunsell 8-coupled design to materialise, although there were plans for others. The new class was largely designed at Ashford Railway Works, but as a result of the unexpected need to redesign and rebuild the South Eastern and Chatham Railway K-Class tanks at Ashford, Maunsell decided to construct the Z-Class at Brighton. To achieve the required specification, a large water and steam capacity was required. The boiler selected was of the parallel non-superheated type with a moderate grate area of 18.6 square foot and a total heating surface of up to 1,279 square foot. The boiler pressure was 180 pounds per square inch, resulting in a tractive effort at 85% pressure of 29,380 pounds. The water tanks could hold up to 1,500 gallons, and the coal bunker 3 tons. 3 16-inch diameter by 28-inch stroke cylinders, interchangeable with those on the N1 and U1 classes, were used, with the outside pair driving the third axle through an 11-foot, 6-foot conrod. Woolshart's valve gear controlled the outside pistons, the inside one having a custom designed gear. The wheels were 4 foot 8 inches in diameter, with the leading and trailing pairs having sufficient side play so that curves of 4.5 chains could be negotiated, despite the 17 foot 6 inch wheelbase. The only adverse feature was the overhang of 11 foot at each end, which meant that the class could only be used where sharp curves were not in tight surroundings. Steam brakes were fitted, as well as vacuum apparatus and steam reversers. Steam heating for passenger stock and banana vans was also provided. The overall result was a responsive, powerful engine which was practically immune to slipping and had a very quiet exhaust beat. 8 locomotives, numbered 950 through to 957, were built at Brighton Works in 1929. Such was the success of the class that a further 10 were planned for Eastleigh Works in 1931, but were cancelled because of the economic climate. Instead, with much far-sightedness, ultimately 3 diesel-electric shunters were ordered. The class quietly and without ceremony went about its design tasks successfully for its entire life, although they were not as successful at trip workings as the G16s. During the Second World War, 3 members of the class, numbers 951, 955 and 956, were loaned to the War Department and served in Scotland. Throughout their working lives, the Z-Class locomotives remained in their role as heavy shunters in the larger marshalling yards at Feltnam, Hither Green, Norwood Junction, Exmouth Junction and Eastleigh, and proved to be very popular with locomotive crews until they were replaced by diesel shunters, latterly known as the Class 12, in the early 1950s. As more diesel-electric shunters were delivered during the 1950s, the class was gradually transferred to less demanding work at Brighton and Tonbridge freight yards. Towards the end of their working lives, the entire class was moved to the western section of the southern region, where their traction was put to good use in banking trains up the steep bank between Exeter St David's and Exeter Central. However, with the reorganisation of British Railways regions in 1962, the western section of the southern region came under the control of the western region. As the Z-Class was not of a standard design under the western region, they were withdrawn throughout 1962, and banking duties were taken over by ex-Great Western Railway pannier tanks. A private attempt was made in the 1960s to preserve a Z-Class. BR number 30952 was the locomotive with the intention to locate it on the Bluebell Railway in Sussex, which seems pretty fitting if you ask me. The locomotive was withdrawn from service in November 1962 and stored in working order at Exmouth Junction Locomotive Shed until the spring of 1963. It was then moved to Fratton MPD, where it was stored for the remainder of 1963 and most of 1964. Unfortunately, the preservation attempt failed, and the locomotive was on the scrap line at Eastleigh Works, with the coupling rods removed and tied to one side by October 1964. It was briefly based at Bristol Barrow Road MPD for a short period of time in early 1965, whilst en route to South Wales for scrapping. It was cut up at Cashmore's of Newport in May 1965. I would like to thank you all for watching and listening. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to hit the like button. If you want to see what's covered next on the show, I highly recommend you subscribe to the channel. We've got 600 people now. Oh god. But no, do you think a preserved Z-Class would actually work on today's Heritage Network? Thank you, and goodbye.